All right, welcome back to MorningLine. Moving right along this morning. Good show as we continue to bring guests on, and they're joining us electronically through Zoom, and that's fantastic. The next aspect of what we're discussing this morning is politics and COVID-19. And to say that there is none of that involved here is absurd. Of course it is. Of course people have to take into account balancing different needs of all of us. And a big need for many people, obviously, is to stay healthy. Another big need is to get back to work and the economy and protecting it and getting it up and running. All of them very important. And how you balance it and what kind of politics come into play, we know that does. And so let's open up the phone lines, take some of your comments on Facebook as well as we talk with political science professor Thomas Schwartz joining us from, look at that, Vanderbilt. Good morning to you, sir. Can you hear me all right?
I can hear you. I can hear you very well. Yep.
Okay,
Absolutely.
Yeah. Let me turn up. I'll make sure I've got you loud. I think the audio's all right. Professor, let me ask you this off the top. I mean, clearly, politics from the beginning, it's a balancing act, isn't it, in COVID-19? But politics play a role in everything we see happening, doesn't it?
Well, of course, this is an election year. Everything, even though, the election, the campaign kind of shut down after everything happened and everything went very quiet for a while, politics are going to come back with a huge roar come the summer and come Labor Day, that time period. And, we have a presidential election and many Senate, House seats, state governorships, everything else. So, yes, it'll be a huge issue by the fall.
Well, let's start. We'll work our way down from the very top, and we can start with the White House and the president. And you can tell with him, it is very important to him. Even before COVID-19 came about, one of his big talking points was how good the economy was doing. And of course, with COVID coming, the economy's taken a beating, and it seems that it is very important to him to get the economy back up and running. And in his mind, I think he recognizes that is a key to his reelection. And so he's going in that direction, trying to balance that with the health of the country. So what about his aspect in the White House?
Well, you captured it absolutely correctly. The central argument of the Trump presidency has been that he had created the greatest economy, that had been seen. And even though that was, as usual, a sort of Trump exaggeration, it was nevertheless quite true that the low unemployment rates were extraordinarily low. The economy was probably one of the most productive and most successful in the world at the time. So, yes, that was his argument, and now that's gone. So the argument has to be, with the campaign commercials that he's released, that we're going to have a comeback, that we got hit by an enemy, and the president characterizes it almost like a war, and that now the United States is rebounding. And so he is very sensitive to the idea that there is going to be a strong economic rebound by the time November rolls around.
So, and you see that then coming from the White House down to governors, and here in the state of Tennessee, Governor Bill Lee, who closely, I think, has followed the president's lead the same way. Different states to different degrees, but we see it opening. Is there some risk for these politicians in saying, yes, if it comes back and the economy roars, it's great. But what if they come back and for whatever reason things spike and we see many more cases that create a problem? Is that a risk then?
Yes, obviously a huge risk of a second outbreak, a rebound that requires either another shutdown or leads to hospitals being overwhelmed with cases. It is an extraordinary risk, and that will be, in a sense, that is the risk that the president will be taking and is encouraging state governors to take. Now, not all the governors are immediately vulnerable on that. Governor Lee has another couple of years, but many of them would be vulnerable politically. The Senate certainly would be up for grabs if there's a second rebound of infections that might lead to a Democratic Senate. So all of this is certainly out there that the president is facing.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about how you view the voters on this. I think about whether this was this president or any other president in this position. People will be able to quibble about whether or not any specific administration responded quickly enough to this. But COVID-19 is not President Trump's fault. And so it's interesting to me. I mean, yes, the economy's gone in the can, and you may want to make arguments different across the political spectrum on whether or not he did enough to address it early enough. But aside from that, it's not his fault it came. But do you think the voters, I mean, the economy would be horrible right now no matter who the president is, okay? And yet it's because the buck stops here, would take the blame for it?
Well, let's remember our history. Herbert Hoover was not responsible for the Great Depression, but it happened on his watch. People blamed him. Same for Jimmy Carter in the late 1970s. Most of the factors that affected him had not been directly traced to any of his actions, economic factors. People tend to look at the administration in power and tend to blame it. Now, this is different, I think, in the sense that you don't see in the public opinion polls yet a dramatic shift in preferences that would indicate that people have been shaken from this president is so polarizing. The numbers have stayed pretty constant. But if there is not an improvement, if the economy does not rebound, if people don't feel like we've overcome it and feel like the president risked too much in opening it, we've had a second outbreak, then I think that small group of people that are still relatively independent of partisan preferences may turn against the president and he may lose. Now, on the other hand, if he is able to sell the comeback argument and things look much better, he could very much win the election. So.
Okay, let's take a phone call for you. We've got Deborah with a question about the politics of it all. Go ahead, Deborah. Do you have a question for the professor?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, my name is Deborah, and I'm concerned about the seniors that's disabled and all these high rises that may be MDHA who don't have transportation and they can't get tested. I know some that have 17 floors.
Okay, and I'm not sure, Deborah, I understand maybe you may have a more specific question about helping the seniors, which is a little off point, but at the same time, and we'll talk some of that actually tomorrow, but just drawing from what she brought up there, Professor, I was just thinking in terms of certain groups that may have voted one way last election looking at maybe different things here, and certainly seniors, the AARP group and others are particularly perhaps vulnerable to COVID-19 and paying closer attention to how things are handling. Is that going to be a factor for them when they vote come November?
A lot of people have made that case that, in fact, the vulnerable populations, over 60 people who tended, at least percentage-wise, to vote for President Trump, might be alienated by a mishandling, a perception that he mishandled the crisis and got many of their fellow age group killed or died from the virus. That certainly is an argument out there. I don't see it yet as having had a huge impact in the numbers, at least according to the public opinion surveys. But if there were a second outbreak, and it particularly afflicted those older, that could obviously have an impact on that. It could have an impact on their willingness to turn out and vote. If they can't vote by mail, or by absentee, they may be unwilling to go to the polling places out of a fear of contracting the virus. So you could have a number of different possibilities. Trump supporters might not be able to get there, or would be reluctant because of the virus, or older people in general. So yes, there's a variety of ways in which it could affect things.
Do you believe, just talking ahead to November, there was some talk, depending on how things go, could the election be moved? And I think we've all agreed that that's probably the very, very last resort. But with regard to what's going to happen come November, I mean, do you think any special steps will be taken? I guess maybe it's too early to say, depending on how things improve or perhaps get worse. How will that affect just voter turnout and people getting out, or how the votes will be tallied?
Well, this is a huge question because I think voting is still, for the most part, a state responsibility. So different states will handle it differently. And I think you'll see perhaps a tendency on different states to go in different directions, again, depending on the severity of the outlook, or the outbreaks, or how they've, the political constellation of forces there. But I think you'll have states like, very blue states like California and New York, really encouraging voting by mail of one sort or another. And this may help the Democrats in some circumstances. It could also, it's not completely clear that voting, absentee voting like that will be a help for the Democrats, but I think a lot of them believe that it will, that their voters might be particularly vulnerable and may really flock to this idea of being able to vote by mail. So I think you're going to see a variety of responses depending on the states, and that this will affect turnout, and that turnout could be absolutely key to this election.
You know, I have someone here saying, you know, along the lines of, you know, today's topic's a good one, but maybe we can talk more about the reopening, and that Nashville is, which is the big story today. Reopening is a key, is it not? The politicians, this is when we were just talking about the president wanting to see things reopen. I saw him tweeting overnight about, you know, how he'd like to see some of the UFC fighting that happened and getting sports back up and running. We'll see what happens with Major League Baseball and the NBA. The metro reopening and the state reopening, that's all part of, I think, for a lot of these politicians, getting things going again.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I mean, the president, I think, really wants things to move much more quickly than they are. And I mean, except for the one moment where he thought he had authority over the states, he realizes he is, in a way, having to persuade states to move in that direction. It's easier with some of his political allies, but in some states it's going to be very difficult for him to push that narrative as long as there's a large number of cases and people are still being affected by it. So yes, I mean, this is something that he clearly, from a fairly early point, saw as necessary to get the country moving back again to some aspect of normality.
Wanted to ask you this, you know, the story kind of emerged over the weekend. The tradition of former presidents not speaking ill of the current president. And typically that's the case. I mean, there are little exceptions here or there, but we saw that, you know, Barack Obama came out, I guess it was a statement that he was making in a conversation. It wasn't private necessarily, but it's come out where he basically was fairly critical of President Trump's response to COVID-19. And just your thoughts on that and how unusual maybe that is or is not in this day and age, especially with very, very unprecedented times.
Well, this is one of those interesting points. Vanity Fair actually ran an article this past month about the ex-president's club, the former president's club, and how Donald Trump really wasn't a member of it, that they really don't like him. And I think that's President Trump is a norm-defying character. He has not followed the norms of the presidency in so many respects. And one of those norms is, of course, consulting with past presidents and all the rest of that. And I think it's not all that was hardly surprising. I think that President Obama would be critical of his response to the crisis. President Trump frequently tries to blame the Obama administration and blame other administrations for a lack of preparedness, and so this must obviously irritate them. President Trump even criticized George W. Bush for releasing a statement about the need for unity, asking why wasn't he there during the impeachment crisis. So you see, these relationships are really quite strained, and it is unusual. It is part of the unusual aspects of the Trump presidency, which breaks from the norms of presidential behavior. Now, it's also not the case that every past president has not gotten criticized by his predecessors. That has happened. There have been cases of it. It's just, this is hardly very surprising in this case, but it has happened in the past. Much more subdued, but certainly did happen. And
okay, so with that, is that more of an indication? And we've already seen President Obama come out and say, you know, he's supporting Joe Biden as it goes. And, and by the way, it's interesting with Biden. It seems like you see stuff every once in a while, but he's really kind of just stepped back. It almost seems like part of it may be by no choice of his own because of the way things are going, and you can't really have rallies and the such. But what do you think of the strategy right now for the Democrats who will be challenging the president?
Well, I think I have sort of mixed feelings about it. You're right that they've kind of disappeared, and it may have the effect of giving people a sense that they're not challenging the president very strongly, and this may discourage Democrats from being as enthusiastic about the candidacy. On the other hand, President Trump also has a lot of self-inflicted errors. His whole talking talking about Lysol and disinfectant and things like that would opened him up to ridicule, these sorts of things. So, in a way, standing back and letting Trump sometimes tweet and do other things that might hurt him is not necessarily a bad strategy in the long run and may work. Biden has also had the problem of having this sexual assault allegation be made against him, so that in a way that's been a distraction as well. So he hasn't been as active on the campaign, but there'll be plenty of time. And he certainly still has, according to the Real Clear Politics average, he still has a 5 to 6 point lead in the national polls over Trump. So he's not, obviously he's not doing something wrong necessarily.
And I guess we're all going to be waiting to see ultimately who his running mate may be. And you hear more and more that it's very likely he may choose a woman. I mean, do you think that's where he's going to go?
He's committed himself to that. I don't think he can backtrack on it. He said he's going to pick a woman. And so the issue has really been, which one? And, at different days you hear Kamala Harris, Amy Klobuchar, Gretchen Whitmer, all these different women who are mentioned, and that they go through different phases of articles about them. There'll be more before the convention. Biden already has a team up screening them, or at least doing some vetting to give him a better idea of choice. And I'm sure they're doing tons of polling as to which of these vice presidential candidates might help.
Professor, listen, we thank you so much for joining us today. Just interesting as we see as this develops, and we'll have to be talking to you more as we approach November for sure, as this is going to be an election like none other we've ever seen. It's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. And I'm not talking about the result. I'm just talking about getting there and getting people out to vote and how that works. So, Professor, thank you so much. Professor Schwartz from Vanderbilt, we appreciate you coming on today, and you be safe, and we'll be in touch soon, all right?
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, my friend. We'll take a break. When we come back, we're just going to open up the phone lines. And as I said, today, of course, Metro Nashville reopening phase 1. What does that mean? I'm curious for those of you either who live outside the area or maybe live here in Davidson County, how you plan to move forward. And, the state already has done some of this. Metro now doing along with the state. Are you to the point where you're ready to go into a restaurant now? Are you going to do some of these things? Are you going to go get your hair cut, a nail salon and the like? And what precautions will you take? And do you think there will be many that don't? Your thoughts on that. If you want to call us, 737-7587, and any of your comments on Facebook at Nick Barris. This is going to be the Facebook page, newschannel5.com on Facebook. We'll be back with more, wrapping it up right after this.